All right, Beth, you're going to stay on with us because there's a lot that we want to talk about here with Beth and also our guests. We have a little bit of time to reflect back on what's been happening inside of that courtroom. And as you know, you watch trials all the time. It's a bit of legal theater, and I don't mean to minimize what happens in there. And it's populated by a variety of characters. And we've seen a variety of characters inside of this courtroom, especially on the defense side. Phil Spector, as you may well know, went through a battery of high-profile lawyers before finally settling on Bruce Cutler to head up his defense team, a fairly now extensive defense team going into his murder trial. Bruce Cutler, famous for his part, among other things, in defending the late mob boss John Gotti. And his style, courtroom style, some people have described it as brash and aggressive, has won over a number of New York jurors. But the question is, how's it doing in this Los Angeles courtroom? Well, our Beth Karras takes a closer look.
I'm Bruce Cutler. I represent Philip Spector.
Phil Spector isn't the only high-profile client Bruce Cutler has represented. He became famous for defending the late John Gotti when he was head of one of the most powerful crime families in New York.
In their lust to convict Mr. Gotti, they created a case and they forgot about integrity.
Gotti became known as the Teflon Don, thanks in part to Bruce Cutler, who was part of a defense team that won 3 acquittals for him. Cutler's reputation grew out of taking on mob informants who testified against Gotti.
He's ruthless with mob turncoats. He had no use for any kind of rat, any kind of turncoat, any kind of cooperating witness. And he knew these were tough guys and wise guys, so he was going to give it tough right back.
His cross-examinations of witnesses were so aggressive they were left feeling crucified, or as the New York media put it,
Brucified. What is it to be brucified?
That's not the question.
He will rip you to shreds. He can also embarrass you. He can get very personal. He can make you doubt what you're saying as a witness, and he'll hammer that over and over and over again, probably until a judge stops him.
Watch what happens when Cutler tries to brucify this witness in the case against Spector.
You formed an opinion.
Excuse me. Excuse me, Mr. Cutler. First of all, you will not yell and point at a witness in my courtroom ever. That's number one. Number two, I was speaking, and I have told you before, when I am talking, do not talk over me. Now you may proceed.
The stinging rebuke does not faze Cutler.
You formed an opinion and judge is guilty.
The objection is...
Just like the police, just like the media.
You need to stop yelling.
I will lower my voice.
He is theatrical.
They had murder on their mind.
He is brash.
At what time?
At any time.
He is aggressive.
Was another thing you threw in, yes?
He's in your face.
It is behavior that prosecutors in this courtroom are finding objectionable.
Objection, argumentative.
The objection is sustained. Excuse me. The objection is sustained.
But adding Philip's name, Philip told me, is akin to what you did with the Uzi, isn't it?
The objection is sustained. Mr. Cutler, the objection is sustained.
The judge is determined to keep Cutler in check.
Mr. Cutler, it's one thing to be animated. All witnesses will be treated with respect.
Yes,
yelling at them is inappropriate.
I apologize, Your Honor. I apologize to you, Ms. Ogden. I get exercised. If something goes off in me, and I apologize to you. It's no reflection on you. You're a nice lady.
Well, even if the devil made you do it, just
yes,
tone it down a bit, okay?
Cutler may be forced to curb his enthusiasm, but not his effectiveness, says Eddie Hayes, a good friend and fellow defense attorney.
They figured out a way to handle Bruce. They object a lot. That worked for them, frankly, because it did sort of throw off his cross-examination.
But Hayes says it would be wrong for the state to count him out too soon.
The big thing about Bruce is most people are afraid of the government, and they're afraid of very high amounts of pressure, and he's not afraid of anybody. The best part of the defense case is to come, so I think you better be careful forming an opinion before the defense case starts to come in.
So, Bruce Cutler inside the courtroom. Note for you, a friend of mine, known him for many, many years, back in the days when I was a defense lawyer, and he's a frequent guest participant here on Court TV. Dr. Napoleon, I'm going to bring you in on this first, if I might, because so much of what you do has to do with counseling, providing advice, professional advice and guidance for trials, how they should be conducted, participants, characters within that courtroom. In terms of Bruce Cutler, his demeanor, effectiveness, this courtroom, this trial, this defendant, this part of the country. Give us some of your thoughts.
Mr. Cutler, of course, is a very talented trial lawyer, but he is a fish out of water. This is Los Angeles, after all, and there is an ambient culture, especially in this particular courthouse, held over from the O.J. Simpson case. And although I'm a fan of Lance Ito, I like Judge Ito, the ghost of Lance Ito is everywhere in this courthouse. And Judge Fiedler, more so than the jury, was going to make very sure that anyone who came into his courtroom and who had designs to take over the courtroom make it an over-the-top theatrical production, which of course is Mr. Cutler's stock in trade, was not going to happen on his watch. Now, if Mr. Cutler had been aware of that ambient culture, the fact that this is one of the first completely televised trials in a while here in this particular courthouse, I think Mr. Cutler would have done well to be sensitive to the fact that the court, Judge Fiedler, had an agenda, and that agenda was dissonant with the modus operandi of Mr. Cutler.
A lot of good points there. I happen to share, just an aside, Dr. Napoleon, you share your view of Judge Lance Ito. I spent time talking with him when I was covering that trial. I always felt that he was a good man, a good judge. Found himself in a situation where I've often said was victimized by a lot of the trial lawyers inside of that courtroom as opposed to him. But I think yes, your point is interesting here. And let me bring Jeffrey into this conversation here, because, Jeffrey, you make your living out there in that area. And I think what Dr. Napoleon says is very interesting and sort of compelling. That, the past is prologue. Obviously, what happened in the past has a lot to do with what we're doing, what's taking place here. And you know Judge Fiedler. You have seen other lawyers trying cases in his courtroom, and we all know that that trial judges, in many ways, their personality infuses their courtroom. Was it a surprise to you then to see that there was a little bit of headbutting going on between Judge Fiedler and Bruce Cutler, and Judge Fiedler essentially saying, this is how my courtroom gets run here?
No, Jack, it wasn't a surprise at all, but you got to remember, I'm a Bronx kid. You can't keep a New York guy down. You just can't keep him down. And Cutler's
That's why we love you. That's why we love you, Bronx kids, by the way.
That's right, I know. And Cutler's got to go in there. And you know what? The jury looks at this and they say, hey, this is a real guy going for the good jugular. He's trying to fight for the client. The judge is going to yell at him. The judge is going to keep him tempered. The judge is going to try and keep him in line. But you really want a guy that looks like he's really cares and really is into it, rather than some flaky, just nondescript, just kind of book learning kind of guy who doesn't have any street smarts, who doesn't really know what's going on and really the guts and gravitas of the case. Cutler knows the gravitas of this case. Cutler's going for the jugular every time he gets up there and every time he questions a witness, and that's the kind of defense guy you want on your side. It's absolutely probably the best courtroom experience you can have, and the judge understands it, but the judge has to follow his rules. There's nothing wrong with the judge keeping him in line, but if Cutler did anything else, he'd lose his credibility, he'd lose his personality, and he'd lose his main thing, which is his touch with the jury. They expect that, they will get that from him, and wait until his closing. His closing is going to be fantastic.
And Sonny, when you watch, Bruce Cutler and lawyers like Bruce, who are so animated, work, one of the things you come away with, if you were a juror and you haven't seen them working the same way every case that they've tried, but you certainly come away saying, hey, you know what? That guy really seems to believe what he's saying, and that can be invaluable.
It can be. He believes that his guy is innocent. That's what they're going to think. I mean, I'm a Manhattan girl, and I tried cases in Washington, D.C., and you know what? I brought my New York to Washington, D.C., and that's what he's doing. He's letting L.A. know that that's what we New York lawyers do. We defend, we believe in our, in our guy, and we're going to take it down to the mats, and that's what he's got to do.
But it's interesting.
It's a master.
It's interesting, Dr. Napoleon, that I tried cases around the country when I was doing that for a living, and you really do find that there is sort of a particular geographical sense, do you? And I know you do this all over the country, all over the world, advising here. Is that a fair characterization, or is that sort of a misconception?
You have to put every case and the players that animate that case within any given particular context. Believe me, trying a case in Los Angeles County is different than trying a case in San Diego County or Butte County in California or in Brooklyn. I want to make an observation about Mr. Cutler because I think we all agree that he is a very talented, genuine person. However, forget the geography for a moment. I think if Mr. Cutler were cross-examining one of Tony Soprano's capos, as opposed to a petite blonde by the name of Diane Ogden, who was a personal assistant to a man whom she is alleging put a gun in her face, I think that the effect would have been different. Mr. Cutler has one speed, and if I were working with Mr. Cutler, I would attempt to modify and fine-tune his particular style to the witness that he is cross-examining.
That's a very good point, because and this sort of echoes what Beth said in her piece. And you know, I've been involved in a lot of trials, a couple dozen murder trials, and if I was in a case where I needed a lawyer to cross-examine a mob guy who was rolling over on another alleged mob guy, you know what, Bruce Cutler's at the very top of my list, because he's the guy that can handle these guys. Good observation. We got a lot more to talk about here, and Sonny and Jeffrey and also Dr. Napoleon are going to stay on with us. Of course, so is Beth Karras as we continue our looking back inside of the courtroom. Now we're going to step aside for a few moments, but we do have a whole lot more that you're going to want to stay around for, so don't go away.